Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. We are positively getting back out onto the road with the Orioles into Kansas City and Arizona. We're going to be talking baseball here soon. We're also going to have a lot of football around here as we get ready for the NFL draft. And next week, we will get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour rocking again. We're going to be at Costas Inn on Friday, next Friday. That is the 11th. We will have a handful of Magic 8-Ball scratch-offs left. I'm going to move into another scratch-off realm as we get going here. Maybe we go back to the future for all I know. Think about Huey Lewis. I'll tell you what, the Orioles went back to the future and needed an ace on Wednesday night. Needed an ace every day at this point. Zach Eflin, nice effort, not nice enough. Luke was at the ballpark on Wednesday night as our accredited media member here at WNST. He'll be back at the ballpark at 1 p.m. Weather withstanding. Sounds like it's going to be a warm, cloudy day. And we're going to talk a little Terps in this thing before it's all over with, too. But, Luke, Corbin Burns, where have you gone? That's all I can say, right?
And Garrett Crochet, you've gone to the other Sox, the team that's not historically terrible. And hey, tosses a career high 8 shutout innings and 8 strikeouts. Orioles had 3 hits against him, or I guess it was 4 hits, and had 1 runner in scoring position. I mean, just did not amount much offense whatsoever.
Well,
And
tough lefty. First off, you have no
yeah,
Henderson. You have no Cowser. You wouldn't have played him anyway, right?
yeah.
Or maybe not.
I mean, maybe Cowser in place of Mullins, but either way, right. I mean, look, most teams aren't going to match up very well against Garrett Crochet. It's why the Red Sox made the trade that they did, and they just gave him a lucrative contract extension. I mean, the talent is there. I mean, we saw that last year with him breaking out with the White Sox, who were otherwise historically terrible, but he was really, really good. The questions are just workload, him going from reliever to starter, like all of that. All the questions we have about every young pitcher, but it didn't phase him on. It didn't phase him on Wednesday night. He was excellent. The Orioles really wasn't until maybe the 6th inning that they even hit a ball hard. So there just wasn't a whole lot to speak of there. Aroldis Chapman comes in and slams the door in the 9th inning, and
I hear he's a nice guy. He's a good citizen.
he can still pitch though. But yeah, but Zach Eflin,
They're
you
not a
said it.
zero tolerance organization.
No, they are not. But Zach Eflin, I mean, he wasn't bad. I can think of 3 pitches he'd like to have back over 6 innings. He pitched. That's the kind of effort you would think most nights will be good enough for the Orioles to have a great chance to win. But when you're going up against a Garrett Crochet who's throwing the way that he did on Wednesday night, the Orioles, 3-0 might as well have been 10-0 at that point in time.
Let's talk about Crochet for just a minute. What would the Orioles have needed to do to make that happen? I mean, when I see that guy, I say, okay, what would that have cost that Corbin Burns wouldn't have cost, that Zach Eflin? And listen, man, anytime I put these broadcasts on, they make me want to vomit. I mean, I start again, and Katie Griggs is selling cupcakes and whatever they're doing, and the $5 beers, and they're doing all of that. And I think to myself, they don't have enough pitching. Ben McDonald and Jim Palmer are watching this thing happen. And I just think to myself, what could the Orioles have done to make that happen? And they praised the Zach Eflin move. Palmer said something like the best move they made all last year. Yeah, because they knew Burns was unsignable, right? They know things we don't know. They knew in August, we knew in August that signing Burns was going to cost a lot of money, and there would be competition for it if his arm didn't fall off, because at one point in July and August, we were worried about him last year. But a guy like Crochet available for the Orioles. The Orioles could have made that move. What would that look like, Westberg, to you? What would that look like to you dealing for him?
I don't think it's gonna be Westberg. I mean, you look at what the White Sox got. It was 4 minor leaguers. Braden Montgomery was in that deal. He's one of their best prospects now. I mean, we've talked about this. The complication with the Orioles is, and I don't say this to excuse them, because you have to make moves. You have to have proper pitching. I mean, my biggest criticism of Mike Elias has been, what about the pitching?
They haven't drafted the pitching, right?
Yeah, you haven't drafted it. You've
You haven't grown
developed
it.
some
Yeah.
guys here. I mean, Kyle Bradish, I give them credit. They developed Kyle Bradish, right? I mean, when Bradish was in the Bundy deal,
I was
right?
going to say, but he was from another organization.
Yeah.
They didn't
So
draft him.
there was at least a baseline there. But, I think what the problem that they've run into, and look, Ken Rosenthal's spoken on this, Jeff Hassan, some of the most plugged in national ball writers have talked about this. When you have the prospects at the top of your system, the way that the Orioles have had the last few years, teams tend to want you to pay a premium because you can pay a premium rather than, what a team that might have. I don't want to say the Red Sox had a bad system because they don't. I mean, the Red Sox have lots of good young players,
But they weren't
but
giving up Jackson Holiday for him.
right,
That's all.
exactly.
That's all.
They didn't have the number one prospect in baseball, and they didn't have to give up the number one prospect in baseball. Whereas we've seen this, with some of the scuttlebutt with Cease over the last couple years, with Crochet, different pitchers that have
Even
been.
Scooble, who might have been available at one point last
Yeah,
year.
I mean, whether he really was or not, it's almost like they look at the Orioles and say, "Well, you have the brand new Ferrari. We want the
But
Ferrari,
as
even
an
if."
Oriole fan, I feel like we're the single guy at the party that's always looking for the prettier girl because we don't have it. And like they're always we're gonna be talking about someone else's pitcher. Now it's the kid in Florida, right? Like we're always gonna be talking about somebody else's pitcher right now. It began last year when Bradish went down and Means wasn't gonna make it, like all that. That they coveted Corbin Burns, right? And they went and got Corbin Burns. Then they needed more, and they went and got Eflin, right? They're now they need more. I mean, I'm sitting. It's April 3rd, and I'm sitting here, and I'm like, they need something like that if they're going to win a World Series before the end of the year. I'm not panicked. I mean, all of you were more panicked. I mean, Viviano, everybody that I talked to was like, they didn't do enough. They didn't do enough. They didn't do enough. Well, it's April 3rd. They didn't do enough. They just got beaten by a number one starter that maybe they could have had. And now I have to say, all right, so what are they going to give up when it comes time to get? I mean, are they going to get another Zach Eflin? Right? They're going to get another two, another
Yeah.
three. That you and I may sign off on that in July if Grayson Rodriguez is back and is okay. But we're not playing games here anymore, dude. I'm 34 years into doing this every day, and we're 3 days into the baseball season, and there's a real season. We haven't had a lot of those. We haven't had a lot of grown-up conversations around here over the years. But this is, I just have to ask out loud, what would it take to get him? And now here we are again in a position where we're going to have to go get another him. If you're going to win a World Series, Zach Eflin ain't going to be your number one, and Sagano is going to be your two, or whatever, however you're going to call it when it comes time to pitching games 1, 2, and 3 in the playoffs. And I know you'll say, "Hey, playoffs, more relief pitching. They're going to need more of that too." And
Yeah.
you've already spent Mr. Rubenstein's money on relief pitchers. You did that a couple of weeks ago when Kittredge went down. So we they're going to be dealing and wheeling, and in the meantime, they're not 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 5 and 5. At some point they're going to need to put some padding in and look like a playoff team even before you worry about the pitching.
Right. And look, everyone gets caught up on a number one. There are only so many number ones. So I don't even necessarily. The Rangers didn't have a true number one. Their true number one was on the shelf 2 years ago. I mean, Jacob deGrom had gotten Tommy John surgery. Last year the Dodgers. Well, we think about the Dodgers as spending all this money. Think back to what their rotation looked like last October. There wasn't a bona fide number one ace in that group. I mean, they were, Jack Flaherty. I mean, he's a rental, right? I mean, so the Orioles have been there. It didn't work out as well for them. But that said, yes, they're going to need another, at a minimum, a guy that you're absolutely going to say, yes, he's going to start a playoff game for us. We're going to feel good about him, right? In the way that, even if the baseline is another Zach Eflin, right?
But
I
they
mean that.
also get into a point, and this is where La Canfora becomes a maniac, where they'll look at Sam Basayo hitting 321 at Norfolk and having 20 home runs and say, "You're not touching him." If any of those guys come on, if Kerstad starts hitting the ball and looking like a big leaguer, I don't know. They make those guys a little more untouchable. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just
Yeah.
saying they need pitching. I just keep going back to they need pitching. You say they don't draft pitching. You beat Elias up about not drafting pitching. The world beats him up about not spending enough money in the offseason on pitching, and they spent a ton. We're in the season now, and what they have is not good enough. And I know that, the people know that. There's my wrestling piece. We'll get into that in a minute. But we know when we identify what Crochet is, get through an October without that. Try to get through a season without that. They had it last year. That's why they were as good as they were last year.
Yeah.
And they had it
But
the year before, really, with Bradish in a numbers sense. They had it the year before.
but to answer your original question, so the Red Sox traded four pieces to Chicago. Right, the headliner was Kyle Teal. He is a catcher at, I think, AAA. He is considered the number 31 prospect in baseball. So you're talking about someone not as good as Basayo. So if you want to use a very basic comp, okay, you could have traded Basayo for him. The other top 100 prospect that they traded, I mentioned already, Braden Montgomery, who's an outfielder. He is young, a little bit on the younger side. He's 21. Uh, According to MLB Pipeline, his estimated arrival could be 2027. He's the number 53 prospect in baseball. And as I mentioned to you, you kind of look at the Orioles right now, as far as where they stand with their prospects. They have two top 15 guys right in Basayo and Mayo. And then there's more of a gap, right? It's not to say that Enrique Bradfield and some other guys they've drafted over the last two drafts won't be good prospects, but there isn't anyone that's widely regarded as the number 40 prospect in
Well, where they
baseball.
were 24 months ago, everybody was pipeline then, right?
Sure.
Holiday was pipeline, Henderson was
Yeah, I mean they've
pipeline, Cowser
graduated
was
those guys.
pipeline, Adley Rutschman was pipeline 2 years ago.
Yeah,
So, like, they're all here now, and that's why they're winning games, right? Literally. But
sure.
pitching wise, who do they have in the top 100 in the pitching pipeline?
I mean the Orioles, no one.
No one.
I mean,
Right.
it's, as far as top 100, that's not to say they don't have any arms at all that aren't at least interesting. But I mean, we saw Chase McDermott last year. Uh, does he profile as maybe he becomes a number five starter? Maybe he's a bullpen arm.
Well,
Cade
you feel that way
Povich.
about Povich before,
Yeah,
but you like him more.
I've said
Yeah.
this. I still think there's a good pitcher somewhere in Cade Povich, or I think there's the potential for a pretty good pitcher somewhere in Cade Povich. I mean, you don't strike out eight Red Sox hitters on opening day, even with the pitch count being what it was, and sit there and say, well, this kid doesn't have any ability, right? I mean, I don't feel that way at all. Problem is, you need them to figure that out way more sooner than later, just because of the current state of their rotation. But you kind of look at guys that they have, and they're guys that maybe 26, 27, 2028. There's some interesting arms when you kind of go down their top 30 list, depending on which source you want to look at. But there's no one that screams, oh, wow, that guy's going to be a difference maker sooner than later. I mean, it's a bunch of guys that, interesting arms, but no one I can sit here with any conviction and say, yeah, that guy will be in their rotation 3 years from now. And that's kind of where my criticism lies with not that Michael Elias has done a poor job overall. I mean, this team's, we've talked about it. They've won 192 games over the last 2 years. I mean, tell me the last time the Orioles did that. You have to go back a really long time. But as they're at this point now, they're completely post rebuild. They've been to the playoffs twice. They have a team position talent wise that you really like, even if it's not perfect. I mean, they're not going to score 8 runs every single night. It's baseball. So, you're going to have nights like what we saw Wednesday night. But when you do look at the pitching, and you look at how they've addressed pitching, largely with just these 1 year deals, Eflin being a trade with an extra year attached to it. You just look at that and say, there's only so much of a ceiling on that. They've gone for the high floor kind of guys. As I've said to you, maybe trying to build a rotation to survive rather than thrive. You'd like to do both, right? You'd like to have a rotation that has a little more upside and can last. It's not easy. There are pitching injuries around baseball. I mean, look what happened to the Yankees before the season even started, and how that changed how they're perceived. They went from being the clear-cut favorite in the AL East to what we all think now is much more of a up for grabs kind of division, where four, maybe all five teams have at least a somewhat of a puncher's chance. So it's the nature of the beast. I'll continue to remind that for as much as we might look at their pitching and have some questions, there are lots of other teams around baseball, including contenders, where you'll ask, will they hit enough? Whereas you hope for the Orioles, Wednesday night, well, notwithstanding, and this kind of choppy start that they've had notwithstanding, you hope that that's not going to be an issue, that it's going to be more of a strength for them.
By the way,
So,
Wednesday night felt like a game one playoff matchup from the last 2 years of playoffs where, and I know they didn't have Henderson, they didn't have a couple of hitters, and obviously
yeah,
Cowser's not around anymore, but it felt like,
could be.
their pitching's too good.
It could
Like,
be. It could be. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that Garrett Crochet, at the Red Sox had the kind of year that they're fully capable of having. And, perhaps the biggest development for them Wednesday night was not even Crochet. It was Rafael Devers actually looking somewhat like Rafael Devers again after just, almost like a late career Chris Davis start, striking out just about every time he was going to the plate. So, but look, the Red Sox, they're intriguing. I think you look at where they are now with their young talent, with what they've done with Bregman, Crochet, and you look at them, they've certainly closed the gap with the Yankees and the Orioles as the division hierarchy kind of shapes up on paper. Now, how healthy will everyone stay? The Red Sox have had, there's some questions about, what their bullpen will look like and again, how everything meshes. I mean, the Devers thing was messy during spring training, but, really for him, it's being healthy. He missed most of the spring and he got off to such a bad start. And you're talking about the guy he's the guy you actually gave money to when you didn't give money to Mookie Betts and other guys. So, but, yeah, when you have a Crochet and, the questions are still there for any pitcher, no matter how much you like him, no matter what he looks like on paper, whatever the stats are, how much money he's making. There's still the question about his durability. And I did find it interesting that he went a career high 8 innings 2 days, one day after he got the lucrative contract extension. I expected him to get that. I mean, the Red Sox weren't going to trade 4 minor leaguers and then not pay him, especially considering the criticism that they've been under the last few years with not really spending money. But is he going to hold up? I mean, that's the big question for him. I mean, that was the big question for everyone. Whether they were going to acquire him at the trade deadline, because it was kind of uncharted territory for this guy to go from relieving to starting and not really have too much of a restrictor plate on him in the way that you see pitchers do that. Teams do that with pitchers today. So it'll be fascinating. But all that being said, all that risk being acknowledged, he absolutely has the stuff looking like a number one starter. And, there aren't 30 of them in baseball. We know that. There are maybe 10, maybe, depending, if you lower your.
Well, when you start taking the Garrett Coles out and you start taking the Bradishes out and you start, when guys start getting hurt, and then,
Sure.
Guys that have pitched
Strider
well the
last
last
year.
3 years. Right, sure.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, Garrett Cole's out of the picture this year. I mean, Spencer Strider, look at the Braves right now. They're an absolute mess. Jurickson Profar popped for PEDs and Reynaldo Lopez is hurt now. And, Strider's still not back yet, which wasn't unexpected, but, they're having all kinds of issues. And they're a team that was projected to have a higher win total than the Orioles, and one of the teams in the NL that people thought might actually have a chance to challenge the Dodgers.
Well, they also let Freddie Freeman get away, right? I mean, they let a generational player go, right?
But they're, the Braves are a team that a lot of Orioles fans have pointed to in terms of look how many guys they've extended. And it's also interesting. You look at how many young players they've extended, and it's easy to look at someone like Acuna, injuries aside, but you look at some of the deals they've done, there's a couple of those I look at them and say, I wonder if they could go back and do it all again, if they'd still do it. So, even that, there's, there's always some risk involved. I mean, the Orioles could announce an extension for Jackson Holliday later today or tomorrow or this weekend, and everyone would be really excited about it. But, and let me be clear, I would be in favor of that. This is not me saying no to that, but you're also talking about someone who has well under a year of major league experience who it's been choppy at best, right? And I fully expect Jackson Holliday to be a good player.
How do you give him $100 million right now? How do you do that?
Oh, I absolutely would do it, but there's still some inherent risk involved in that. Now, it's not the same risk as giving someone $700 million or giving a pitcher $250 million, but this is part of it. I mean, at some point in time, you do look at Mike Elias and look, I don't think the Orioles are ever going to be all in, I use with air quotes, in the way that you think about, we talk about this in the NFL. Like, do the Ravens ever truly go all in with the way that they try to build their roster? No, they try to.
But they have a salary cap. Baseball doesn't, which is both sides of this. Because if Henderson's going to get $600 million, he might be getting that from the Mets or the Cubs or somebody that's spending that kind of money at that moment that has it, because there's 15, 20 franchises that don't have it and can't do it.
Right. But that's, whether you have a salary cap or you just have a finite revenue stream that frankly the Dodgers don't, the Dodgers there's a limit to it at some point in time, but not the same as the Orioles, right? Not the
Well, that's
same
the
as
question you ask a
so that's
74-year-old owner
yeah,
when you
so
have him, on the cover of your magazine. When you get together with him, you ask him what he's going to spend,
right.
and like that, like, because he's going to have to be a sugar daddy.
Yeah.
Katie Griggs knows that. I know that. The people know that. Ken
Sure.
Rosenthal knows that. Like, did you see the ballpark on Wednesday? I didn't, because they didn't give me a press pass. They had all sorts of empty seats in their press box, but they don't have room for me. They have plenty of room for everybody else. Where is the revenue coming from
Yeah.
for this? So at every point, they're going to play with one hand tied behind their back because they're the Baltimore Orioles, because of what Mr. Angelo said to me 28 years ago, which is, if there's a team in Washington, there's a team. We don't believe there should be a team in Washington. And now that there is, you're either going to be a sugar daddy, or if you're going to run it nut on nut. I saw what nut on nut looked like, and the Red Sox fans were in there on Wednesday night, and $5 beers, and people. We spent 2 hours before the game talking about, can I get the games? How much is it going to cost me to get the games, and all of that stuff. This is where the Crochets and the the best players and what they're going to cost in the future now that Rubenstein is here, whether you're going to be philanthropic in regard to the way you run the team, giving money to baseball players to make the team better, to get people there, because I'm not sure they're ever going to measure up financially to be in the conversation we talk about with the Red Sox and the Yankees. I've seen the
Yeah.
Red Sox and the Yankees over the last 30 years. I've been to their stadiums. I've been to their areas. I know what the cities look like. I know what the towns look like. I know what the money looks like. I know what the corporate structure looks like. It ain't happening here. So unless Mr. Moneybags is going to be philanthropic and charitable and go in over his skis, he's a money guy, dude. He's a guy
Sure.
that's being counted his way to being a billionaire. I don't think he's a generous man, like in a general sense. You know what I mean? I don't feel like he's just going to be generous about this, but there is the point where the thing's going to sell for $3.5 billion at some point, and if he goes $100 million over his skis for 6 years, 8 years until he's 85, that they could win, and he could do the little Tom Benson dance that he wants to do on
Right.
bobblehead night. He can have a bobblehead with him holding the trophy. That's what he
Well,
really wants to do.
and that's
And there's nothing
and
wrong with that.
right.
There isn't.
And look, when you look at the teams that, and let's throw the Dodgers out for a second, right? Throw the Dodgers and the Yankees, and I'm trying to, just throw those two out for right
Well, the
now.
Cubs would have the money. There are a couple of
Sure.
teams that would have the money if they didn't pocket it.
Yeah, Philadelphia has had a very, very high payroll. Do they have the same revenue stream as the Dodgers? Probably not quite at that level, but with all these teams, and this is even when you get into the kind of territory where I'm hoping the Orioles can get. I've mentioned the Cardinals. I've cited that. I've cited them. If they have something that they build and sustain, can they be a top 12 kind of payroll, where you're flirting with the top third of the league. Whereas to me, that kind of payroll, you can probably do a couple extensions. Now, you're not going to be able to extend six guys, right? You're not going to be able to extend everyone you have.
Doing what the Padres have done in
Right.
recent years,
Be
right?
selective. The Padres have had Manny Machado, and they've been able to extend and make some other moves. I
Well, Tatis looked like the greatest player on earth for a minute, right?
Sure, sure. So that's where I look at this thing and say, okay, if not now, when, right? But because, and look, we've talked about it. If you're a Boris client, it's more difficult. At
Well,
the
that's the
same
first
time,
conversation we have,
sure.
right?
At the same time, I also kind of loathe the idea that we just put everything on the agent, because who hires the agent? The agent works for the player. So at some point in time, you could talk all you want, Boris, Boris, Boris,
I don't know that
but
it's Gunnar Henderson's life goal to be an Oriole for life. He sees Cali, waves to him, and all that, and then he goes and he sees Aaron Judge play in New York, making 50 times the amount of money,
or
and
he,
saying, I mean, he's a kid from Alabama. I don't. Maybe he wants to be a brave one. I don't know what he wants to be when
no,
he grows up, but like, he's under no
no,
thought to give anybody a discount or sign up now, and Boris will tell him that, and Boris will
yeah.
say, "Be patient." The same way that if you think they could give Jackson Holiday $100 million right now, that his daddy, who already has $500 million, would say, "Nah, hang in there, kid.
Yeah,
Go hit
that's a
the
little
ball. Don't
different.
worry about it. You know,
Yeah,
it's different when you got a rich daddy too.
sure.
You and
There's
I
no
didn't have rich daddies. You know, the first
yeah.
20 million would have sounded like a lot to
Oh,
us.
no question. Well, and I think that's why, some of these players you do see, guys that are, we've seen guys extended for not $400 million or anything absurd, but we've seen guys sign these kind of deals before they even make their major league
Adam Jones
debut.
and Markakis signed up for money around here before they could have, should have, needed to. Right? I mean, they
Um,
wanted to be here. They bought in.
but Jones was toward the end, though. Remember, I mean, Jones was not far away from free agency at that point. But your point's well taken, and again, you kind of
He
look
would have
at
gotten more
this.
from the Yankees at that moment, right? I mean,
Sure.
if he had hit the right, if he wanted
Well,
to leave, he
and
liked it here.
look, that's where we look at this thing and
He had a
say,
wife here. He's got a he likes it here now. God
sure.
bless Adam Jones. Doesn't
And
like
this is
me, but I like him a lot.
where I say Gunnar, with someone like Gunnar Henderson, look, I'm not going to sit here and say Gunnar Henderson absolutely does want to be an Oriole long term or absolutely does not. I'm guessing the truth is somewhere in the middle there where he'd say, well, let's see how this plays out.
I just
I
got
like it in
here.
Baltimore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
I've
not
been
get
here a couple
married yet. Let's
years.
just go on some dates. That's what
Let's
guys do when they're
let's see what
23.
we do here. Do we win? What's the roster look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now? All of that. With all these factors, it's rarely just one thing. If it is money, fully acknowledging that, but there are plenty of guys that aren't necessarily going to take every last cent from the absolute highest bidder. It might be the second highest bidder if there are three other variables that appeal to them about, whether it's staying put, going somewhere geographically like Corbin Burns, in Arizona is kind of a dream scenario for him, with his family and wanting to be on the West Coast. And, that kind of just the stars aligned for him in that way. So, you have to let it play out in that way. And it is frustrating because you'd like to think the Orioles could get one of these done, one of these extensions done that, it's not going to be a Soto deal. I mean, Gunnar Henderson's the only guy that they currently have that would even, kind of be not 700 million, but, I don't know. Gunnar might be a $400 million player before it's all said and done. And again, I'm projecting out 4 years from now. But you'd like to think, you look at some of these deals that have been signed this past week where you're talking about like a 9-year, $100 million deal. You buy out the first couple years of free agency for a young player. Hypothetically, Jackson Holliday feels like he would be that guy. But you bring up a great point because Matt Holliday's made a bunch of money and Jackson Holliday has not wanted for anything growing up. And his dad's probably saying, you don't really need to do that. Or maybe the Orioles haven't even approached him about that. I mean, again, we don't really know, but it is frustrating because you see even teams that aren't big market teams are able to do these deals from time to time. And man, you'd feel a lot better about just the big picture for the Orioles if they could get one of those done. Even if it was just buying out a couple years of free agency for one of their young players. But it hasn't happened to this point. It's not something worth ruining your enjoyment of the 2025 season, but it does make you wonder in a big picture, if not now, when, as it pertains to these guys. Or, and I don't say this to be too much of a Debbie Downer, but it's going to come across that way, or you are going to be a lot like the Tampa Bay Rays and you're going to have a churn. And look, Tampa Bay's still made a lot of playoff runs and they've been to a couple World Series over the last 15 years.
But that's what
However,
poor owners do. That's not what
no
rich
question,
owners do.
no
That's not
question.
what
Let me,
74-year-old
I
old guys.
understood. I'm laying out the scenarios though, as far as what the range of outcomes is. And, you have a baseball ops department that, look, they think highly of what they do and they have rebuilt this thing and they have taken this organization a very long way as it pertains to player development, international market presence, all those different things. But they also may be viewing it through the lens of, we'll continue to show how smart we are and we can do this and we can continue to sustain something without spending $200+ million a year. There could be some of that going on. People have speculated that. I don't know that, but until we see, unless we have a crystal ball, all we can do is kind of map out, these different scenarios and kind of imagine how it's going to work. But, until they have anyone sign long-term, until they sign any long-term deals beyond a 3-year 49.5 for Tyler O'Neill that has a year one opt-out, this is kind of all we have to go off of, these short-term commitments and just relying on guys with club control, which, let's face it, has taken them quite far when it comes to the regular season. But yeah, people are wondering, okay, what's the next step in terms of getting to the next level in October, but also sustaining this thing, understanding you hope you're not going to be picking in the top 5 anytime soon again. So yeah, it is more challenging to replenish that talent pipeline.
Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke. He will be covering the Orioles today, tomorrow, every day into the future. My name is Nestor. I will be locked out today, tomorrow, and into the future. So enjoy those hot dogs and popcorn at the ballpark. I'll be writing a letter to Katie Griggs. Dear Katie Griggs is coming your way out of Baltimore Positive. We're going to have something to say about the Terps and Buzz Williams and just the whole mess at some point. We're also talking football. Luke and I did a long piece on the NFL owners meetings and the Ravens' intentions and their draft days coming up. Have they announced the Liars luncheon yet? We got one yet?
No announcement. I've heard it's more towards the middle of the month, though. That was the last I heard. So we're still at least a week and a half out on that, from what I've heard, but nothing official. They haven't sent anything out yet.
All right, you are listening to the original April Fool. That's me. He's Luke Jones. You can find us both out on the interwebs and, of course, at Baltimore Positive. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore Positive, even when the Orioles are out in Kansas City and Arizona.